Okay, we'll start with this, and I'm sure that most of you are aware by now. Per tweet from Mike Copinger, Canelo Alvarez's trainer, manager, Eddie Reynoso, announces that the star fighter is now a free agent. Sources tell The Athletic that Alvarez and Goldenboy are finalizing a complete severing of their relationship. That also means Alvarez is free from DAZN. Chris Mannix tweeted, as part of Canelo Alvarez's exit from his Goldenboy DAZN agreements, Goldenboy is working on restructuring its deal with DAZN. Sources told Sports Illustrated now. Goldenboy Promotions stable includes Ryan Garcia and Virgil Ortiz, two emerging stars. And that's not all, folks. They're working on getting Canelo Alvarez out there before this year is out. And they're working towards getting him out there against IBF super middleweight champion Caleb Plant. So what can we expect to see now? What can we expect to happen moving forward? What possible scenarios may come about in the future? And what led us here? What led us to this point? What led to Canelo Alvarez completely severing ties with both Goldenboy Promotions and DAZN? I told you guys already.
This is Goldenboy's fault.
They walked Canelo Alvarez into a situation that he wasn't in agreement with in order to gain access to the DAZN platform. And in the process of doing so, what they might have done, in effect, is violate their fiduciary duties to that fighter. I told you guys in my previous videos that as far as that remaining $270 million that Canelo was trying to get from DAZN, that he doesn't stand much of a chance of being awarded that kind of scratch, that kind of cash, for various reasons. And I'll leave the links to those videos in the description box, but better still, I told you guys that the most Canelo Alvarez stands to gain from this lawsuit is free agency. And in achieving free agency, he would be able to negotiate deals moving forward on his own behalf without Goldenboy Promotions acting as the middleman, the mediator between Canelo Alvarez and a given platform.
That's the most he stood to gain out of all of this.
Question now is, since Canelo Alvarez is no longer with Goldenboy Promotions and he's not going to be fighting on DAZN, does this upcoming Caleb Plant fight herald a future partnership between Canelo Alvarez and the PBC? And to that I would say, not necessarily. You gotta understand that Canelo Alvarez's next fight was going to be in the super middleweight division one way or another.
Right.
But because he's no longer in bed with DAZN, he's not gonna fight Callum Smith. He's not gonna fight Billy Joe Saunders, the kind of fighters that he would have fought had he still had a relationship with DAZN and Goldenboy Promotions. The only other champion out there for Canelo Alvarez to fight in the super middleweight division just so happens to be a PBC fighter. That's basically saying that just because Canelo might be fighting Caleb Plant in his very next fight, perhaps on December 19th, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to walk into another kind of partnership, make another kind of commitment to a network. Lest we forget what Canelo Alvarez's problem was. He wanted control over his fights. He wanted control over the situation. He didn't want some network and some platform wagging their fucking finger in his face and telling him what's what. That whole fiasco with DAZN and what opponents they're willing to accept or not accept for what dollar amounts.
That ruffled Canelo's feathers.
And I think that's a big part of how we got here. I think that Canelo Alvarez was under the impression that he had more control over the situation than he actually had. That when Goldenboy Promotions first entered into that deal with DAZN, they agreed to certain things that Canelo Alvarez himself did not agree to. The kind of things that led us here. That Canelo Alvarez didn't have a contract with DAZN, thus, he didn't agree to anything. Whatever it is that Goldenboy Promotions agreed to is not something that Canelo Alvarez himself agreed to. And then, whatever it was that Goldenboy Promotions agreed to gain access to the DAZN platform, in doing so, they might have violated their fiduciary duties to Canelo. They may have violated their existing contract and their existing agreement in the process of so empowering DAZN to make certain decisions. Basically, your contract with DAZN doesn't line up with your contract with Canelo, and that might be why they decided to release him from that contract.
That's the inference we can make.
Do you know how catastrophic this is for Goldenboy Promotions? I mean, they're literally restructuring their deal with DAZN as a result of releasing Canelo Alvarez, because now you're not bringing to the table for DAZN what you were bringing to the table before. You guys aren't important as you used to be. You gotta put your thinking cap on for this one. I told you, Canelo Alvarez might not have enough there to get $270 million out of this lawsuit, but what he might have is enough grounds to seek release from his contract with Goldenboy to become a free agent. That there might have actually been enough there to substantiate that. Understand? Goldenboy Promotions had Canelo Alvarez under contract, and they have so decided to release him. Do you think they did so by choice? Do you think they did that because they wanted to do that? Do you think that this is how Goldenboy Promotions wanted all of this to work out? Certainly not. They're losing their biggest asset. We can make certain inferences based on how all of this worked out, that perhaps Canelo Alvarez didn't have enough there to get $270 million from DAZN. But what he did have was grounds for release, because that's what Goldenboy Promotions has done. They've released him. Perhaps Goldenboy Promotions so decided to release Canelo Alvarez from his contract because they knew that the longer this goes on, the more apparent it's going to become that DAZN is not at fault here. DAZN can protect themselves, but Goldenboy Promotions, as a promotional company, might be held liable for a breach of contract and violating their fiduciary duty to this fighter based on what they agreed to with DAZN. DAZN doesn't have a fiduciary duty to Canelo Alvarez, but Goldenboy Promotions does, or did. And they violated that fiduciary duty to Canelo in the agreement they reached with DAZN in that situation. I reiterate, DAZN is not at fault.
But Goldenboy is.
In light of this, they decided to let him go. They released him from his contract. This leaves us left to wonder, how long before Ryan Garcia makes a similar move? How many times has he been pissed off with his promotional team, with his promotional company, Goldenboy Promotions? What's his future with Oscar De La Hoya, with Eric Gomez? What's his future with them? And what becomes of Gennady Golovkin now? The whole reason for DAZN picking up that guy and treating him like some kind of a financial incentive was the intention of staging a third Canelo Alvarez fight. That fight don't look like it's gonna happen now. That's the thing. This is a big loss for Goldenboy Promotions, but in many ways it's a loss for DAZN too. How many fighters on that side of the street that fight on that platform aspired to land a Canelo Alvarez fight? Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, Gennady Golovkin, Demetrius Andre. A lot of these guys that were using the name of Canelo Alvarez as a crutch to delay what other fights are out there, what fights are possible, perhaps even more feasible. A lot of those guys, they ain't got Canelo Alvarez's name to use as an excuse anymore. They're gonna have to fight each other. That goes for Billy, that goes for Callum, that goes for Gennady, and that goes for Demetrius Andre. You know, Demetrius and Gennady, they're both world champions in the middleweight division. Billy and Callum, they're both world champions in the super middleweight division. And neither one of those four guys can continue to throw the name of Canelo Alvarez around as a reason, as a means to not fight other people. Now, some guys have been doing this more than others, but better still, that is the situation that has been created as a result of Canelo being released from Goldenboy Promotions. And if I'm being honest, it's hard to imagine that any fighter that fights on the DAZN platform is a part of Canelo Alvarez's immediate or distant future. One angle of this story that I didn't anticipate is that the very next fighter that Canelo Alvarez would fight would be a PBC fighter, would be Caleb Plant. I didn't expect that. What I half expected to happen was for Canelo to seek release from his contract with Goldenboy Promotions and negotiate a new contract on his own behalf with DAZN. That was what I was expecting, and that's not what happened. That's not what's going on here. What that means for those fighters on that side of the street who fight on the DAZN platform,
all of them,
under the Matchroom banner, is Billy and Callum ain't got no excuse anymore to not fight each other, so they better get to it. That if what you want is a big payday, the next time you get out there, you're gonna have to be a part of something intriguing. You're gonna have to step into the fire. As far as Gennady Golovkin, I don't imagine that they're gonna give this guy $14 million to fight Kamil Zeremata, not after having gone through what they just went through with Canelo Alvarez. For Gennady, I think a unification match with Demetrius Andre is in order, because it don't look like you're gonna be fighting Canelo in the near future for a third time, if at all. And as far as Canelo, what the near future might hold for him in association with and beyond a Caleb Plant fight. People are already picking Canelo to beat that guy, and I understand where that comes from. I get it. But beyond that fight, what can we expect to see from Canelo Alvarez? In truth, I'm not convinced that he will enter a multi-fight or multi-year agreement with anybody. I think that's the kind of situation that he's trying to get away from. But what he might do is maintain a fight-by-fight relationship with the PBC. That's right. Earlier this week, we heard the Canelo Alvarez people talking about how a Jermall Charlo fight has to happen next year.
You think that came from out of nowhere?
If Canelo fights Caleb Plant December, before the year is out, it's conceivable that he could take on Jermall Charlo at some point next year, perhaps on Cinco de Mayo. That Canelo Alvarez's very next two fights could come against PBC fighters, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he himself will become a PBC fighter. He might maintain a certain level of free agency. At this point, it's anybody's guess what happens next. Now, there is still more to be addressed in reference to Canelo Alvarez moving forward, namely the Caleb Plant fight. There are those out there who feel that Goldenboy Promotions provided him with a safety net that allowed him to get his way in more ways than one. And now that he's not with Goldenboy Promotions, who's going to provide that safety net for those close decisions, for those rehydration clauses and catch weights, etc., etc.? And need I remind you, kids, that Canelo Alvarez wasn't the A-side because he was with Goldenboy Promotions. It was the A-side because of the money that he generated, his marquee value, his market value. And that's why moving forward, he's still the A-side to anyone from 160 to 175 pounds. That bit of it, that hasn't changed, whether Canelo Alvarez is with Goldenboy Promotions or not. It's a very similar situation to what we saw with Manny Pacquiao years ago when he parted ways with Top Rank. Unless your name is Floyd Mayweather Jr., in all likelihood, Manny Pacquiao is going to be the A-side.
That's right.
Those aren't just the facts. Manny Pacquiao was the A-side to any welterweight, whether he was on the Top Rank side of things or the PBC side of things. Really didn't matter because his A-side status had everything to do with the money that he generates. And the same applies to Canelo. So if you're telling yourself that Canelo's A-side antics, his A-side shenanigans, are going to come to a screeching halt as a result of him parting ways with Goldenboy Promotions, let me tell you, that's not going to change. It's not going to change whether he's with Goldenboy, and it's not going to change whether he's got some kind of thing going on with the PBC. That's not going anywhere. What could happen is Canelo Alvarez could end up fighting Caleb Plant, and let's be honest, Caleb Plant, skillful fighter that he might be, high ceiling that he might exhibit, hasn't faced the quality of competition, the same caliber of fighters that Canelo Alvarez has. It's highly probable that Canelo Alvarez beats that guy. Perhaps he moves on from that and fights Jermall Charlo at a catchweight of his choosing, or maybe he fights Avni Yildirim for the vacant WBC title. Need I remind you that Avni was an opponent that DAZN would not approve. Well, what DAZN approves and what DAZN doesn't approve isn't Canelo Alvarez's problem anymore.
So maybe he fights him for the vacant WBC title.
Or maybe, by the time he's done with Caleb Plant, Avni or somebody else is in possession of that title and Canelo Alvarez fights that guy in a unification match. There are a lot of people out there that are having a lot of misapprehensions as far as what all of this means. And if you think that this is the end of Canelo Alvarez's A-side antics, you're in for a rude awakening, because that's not going anywhere. That's not going to change. The only difference between then and now is now Canelo Alvarez is so empowered to negotiate deals on his own behalf and collect more of his own money by working with the networks directly, though only making what commitments he sees fit to make.
That's the only difference.
And as hard as Canelo Alvarez has fought to achieve free agency, I don't imagine he would give it up so easily by making a commitment to Fox or by making a commitment to Showtime. I'm just not sure. I'm not convinced, because it seems to be his freedom that he wanted the most. Reports indicate that DAZN was willing to compromise with this guy. Give him $20 million, at least for now. And it was his freedom that Canelo Alvarez valued the most. There is a question as to whether or not now Canelo Alvarez can make the money that he was set to make on DAZN by going back to the conventional pay-per-view model. I still think that Canelo Alvarez can move the needle better than anybody, but I do question as to whether or not he can move the needle enough to get $20 million. Clear that off a domestic United States pay-per-view. I wonder.
Let alone $33 million.
Because in order to generate that kind of scratch on a domestic pay-per-view, you've got to sell a minimum of 400,000 pay-per-view buys, about 412 to be exact. That's just to generate the 33 million. We all know that the fighter don't take all of that home. A good chunk of that goes to the break-even point and whatever profit the network and everybody else wanted to make. So in order for Canelo Alvarez to clear $33 million for himself, this guy'd probably have to sell well over that. Well over 1,200,000 pay-per-view buys, maybe close to 1 million. And you gotta wonder, does fighting Caleb Plant, does that get you there? Does fighting Jermall Charlo, does that get you there? What big names are out there in the super middleweight division, or the middleweight division? I mean, aside from Gennady Golovkin, and we've already been there and done that with that guy 2 times. Aside from that guy, what big names are out there that would move the needle enough that Canelo Alvarez could walk away with a cool 33 million or even a cool 20 million? Which one of these guys gets him there? Even with Caleb Plant, if he fights that guy next, does he make $20 million doing it? Does he clear that? We'll find out.